All right. Hello, hello, and welcome, everyone. So happy to have you all here with us today. And so, Leslie Bytel here, business coach and mentor for online healthcare professionals. And I want to welcome you all to this special interview. I'm really, really excited about today's session. So, today I will be chatting with two extraordinary moms, Sarah and Kara, who had never heard of PKU until they got the fateful phone call when their perfect little babies, their perfect newborns were just 3 days old, right? And that was the first time that they had ever heard of PKU. So we're going to share a little bit more about their story. Now, many of you joining me here today, depending on your background and your training, if you have medical training or if you're a dietitian, you probably remember learning about PKU in school. I know I remember learning about PKU, but you were likely told that kind of like, don't worry about it. You're never going to see it in real life because it's so rare. And certainly this was the same, very true for me until both my little niece and nephew were diagnosed with PKU. And I saw firsthand, I mean, my sister, who you'll meet here shortly, her and her husband make this look so easy. But I got a firsthand view of kind of the behind the scenes challenges of managing this disorder with diet to prevent the progression of neurological damage. So I'm really excited to have you all here today. Let me kind of give you a rundown of a few of the things that we're going to talk about today. So we're going to do a quick review of PKU. Just a really quick review. We're going to talk about the prevalence and how it causes progressive and often severe neurological damage. What does a low phenylalanine diet really look like? So we're going to explore that today and talk about really the realities of managing this disorder with diet. It's a very, very strict diet. And we'll move into some tools to help parents better manage their child's phenylalanine levels, and of course, much, much more. So before I go any further, I'd love it if Kara and Sarah, if you guys can introduce yourselves. Why don't you go? Yeah, Kara, why don't you go first since you're right next to me? My sister,
sure,
this is my awesome sister, Kara. I'm so excited. So Kara lives in Seattle. I live outside of Chicago, so it's really fun to get to hang with my sister today.
Yeah, it's fantastic, especially during COVID. We don't get to see each other all that often. So yeah, so
Right.
my name's Kara Stone, and I live out here in Seattle. I've lived here for about 12 years. We have two littles, an 8-year-old girl and a 3-year-old boy that both have PKU, classical PKU. And yeah, we just, we describe them as extraordinary children with a rather unique diet. So a lot of friends and a really great support network here in Seattle, and just make it a no drama deal. So
I love it. So we'll talk more about how you manage that, especially with two kids. It's crazy. So all right, thanks, Kara, and welcome, Sarah. Can you tell us a little bit about you?
Sure. My name is Sarah Chamberlain. I am both the parent of two children, one of whom has PKU. I have an 11-year-old and then a 7-year-old who has PKU. And I live in New Jersey, just outside of New York City. And I'm also the executive director of National PKU News. And that is a support and advocacy organization for patients, families, clinicians managing diagnosis of PKU and other metabolic disorders which require a low protein diet. There are a lot of disorders which have sort of similar needs, and the diet is a treatment for many of them. So we try to focus on a wide range. So I'll give the brief intro of PKU. Like Leslie said, it is an inborn error of metabolism. It is autosomal recessive, which means both parents need to be carriers and pass down that gene in order for a child to have PKU. So unbeknownst to me and maybe to Kara and her husband, like we didn't know we were carriers until we got that call. And it was a 1 in 4 chance that our kids would have PKU. So Kara hit the lottery more than I did. And there are only about 275 babies born in the US every year with PKU. And like Leslie said, it's the inability to break down phenylalanine, one of the amino acids in protein. And if the body doesn't metabolize that into tyrosine and further down that lovely metabolic pathway that all the dietitians recognize, and then it builds up in the blood, and it crosses the blood-brain barrier and causes severe severe brain damage, essentially. And it is the reason that the newborn screening test, the little heel prick that every baby gets in the hospital or at home birth, was invented, because those first 3 months of life are so essential that if PKU is not caught and treated in those first 3 months, the brain damage is really catastrophic and unrecoverable. I mean, when my daughter was born, they said, ask your parents if they had cousins who were shut away, meaning they were taken out of their homes and put in care homes, because in that time, babies born before the mid-60s, before newborn screening, often could not be cared for at home. And they live full lifetimes, I mean, 60, 70, 80 years. But sometimes their mental progression doesn't go above age 2, 5, et cetera. It sort of varies with everyone. So newborn screening, this little pink slip of paper that is in the file that everyone goes home from the hospital with. And then most of us throw away because we don't get that phone call. The good news is that once we do get that phone call, PKU can be treated with a low protein diet and a metabolic formula, which provides most of the nutrition. It's the nutrients, it's the phenylalanine free protein that you don't get from the natural protein, because people with PKU, again, it varies, but can be limited from 2 grams of natural protein a day to 12, 14. It all sort of depends on what your body can metabolize.
Okay. Yeah. So both parents have to be carriers. And I mean, most of us have no idea whether or not we're carriers. And, we don't think about that when choosing our partner, right? So kind of an interesting thing. So I'd love to hear Kara, a little bit from Kara about, just the experience of getting that phone call. I certainly remember it because, I was on the receiving end. I remember exactly where I was when you called me to share this news with me. And to be honest, it's completely shocking. Well, I'll let you tell the story.
Yeah. So we were, we were obviously a few days in. We were already home with our daughter, Kaylin, who's now 8. And for those of you that have had babies, that simple little world you live in when you're caring for a baby, especially when you just brought them home. So, I remember being really comfy in my big chair and hanging out with little tiny KK. And then the phone rang. I just happened to have it next to me, and I saw that it was the pediatrician. And oftentimes, at least in most states, it's the pediatrician that makes this phone call. And just as unfamiliar as many of us are with PKU, most pediatricians have also not dealt with this particular disorder because it's so rare. So this pediatrician had never delivered this news before, and also was not very familiar with PKU. So when he called and gave me the information, instead of calling with a calm, measured tone, he went right into, your child could have brain damage, and you need to get to Children's Hospital immediately, and you need to get this urine test and this blood test done. Get up right now and go. I still have my notes that I took down from that day with brain damage underlined multiple times. And Jeff, I remember looking at Jeff across the room with these eyes like, we need to get out of here, into a full flurry. And that particular pediatrician just, again, wasn't skilled enough to understand. When we went to Children's Hospital, which we visit now monthly to get blood draws, and have had an unbelievable experience every time since this day. But on this particular day, we also ran into a person that, we needed to work with to get our labs done. And he was unfamiliar with the tests that we had to get in order to, I don't know if any of you have collected urine from a baby girl, but it's not particularly easy, especially if you're a new parent and you don't understand that the minute you take off the diaper, they start peeing. So anyway, that was also a wild ride trying to collect that and sitting in the hospital until we could collect it. And he was like, his attitude was, good luck with that. I'm not sure how you're going to do this, which obviously made us
Thanks
just
a lot, buddy.
break into a sweat. The good news is once we got the diagnosis that it was official, the calming voice is the clinic. There's PKU clinics. Those folks are skilled. The next call we received was, your child is perfect and beautiful, and this is manageable. And I understand that you're Googling right now, but please don't Google. Wait until you can talk with us in order to get this, get the treatment going. So yeah, the initial phone call was startling, and then the phone call after that and the corresponding visit with the clinic definitely allowed us to see that this was manageable and that she would be just fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank goodness. Yeah. Like you said, in our training, and it sounds like it's similar in terms of what the pediatricians go through. It's one of those things, you learn about it, but then it's like, don't even give it another thought because it's so rare, you'll never see it anyway. And FYI, I know I'm going to age myself a little bit here, but when I was in my training, they said the same thing about celiac disease.
Oh,
like,
okay.
Don't worry about it. You'll never see it. It's so rare. They used to, call it like, celiac sprue. I remember learning about it, but they're like, yeah, another one of those things. You'll never see it. And look at the, oh my gosh, it's just exploded.
Well, I have that too. So.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, really the lottery winner.
We'll have another Facebook Live on that, okay, Kara?
Yeah. Okay.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I'd love to hear from Sarah. Just so Sarah, you're a parent. Obviously, you have a daughter, 7-year-old daughter, who is diagnosed with PKU, and that was your first, official, I don't know, like that's the first time you heard about PKU yourself.
It
and
definitely
then,
was.
How did that, tell me about that. And how did you end up, in this position you're in now?
Okay, well, a funny story about it being I hadn't heard it. I said, after we took a few days and dealt with everything, I told a few close friends, and my friend said, oh, that's the Diet Coke thing. She's a lifelong drinker of Diet Coke, and sure enough, it says phenylketonuria contains phenylalanine on Diet Coke, sugar-free gum, anything with aspartame in it. Now, we'll talk a lot about, what a struggle the diet is, and part of what I do day in and day out, and what we all do is try to figure out exactly how much protein and therefore phenylalanine is in something. So you're like, well, why is Diet Coke labeled? Well, Diet Coke aspartame is approximately 50% phenylalanine. So it is basically, you would look at a can of Diet Coke and it says 0 protein, and you would think it's perfectly safe because it's just sugar and water and, and aspartame. But because it contains that phenylalanine and a lot, basically a 12-ounce bottle of Diet Coke is more than a third of my daughter's phenylalanine for the day. They have to label it. But that was, other people who drink a lot of Diet Coke had heard of it. And I was like, what are you talking about? And sure enough, it's there. So basically when I worked for myself, I had my own company as a web developer, and I was on maternity leave, which is not real when you work for yourself, and not real for a lot of people in general. But, and there was a listserv with sort of information about PKU, which I'm sure Kara, also subscribed to. And there was some Facebook activity, but much less then. And on the listserv, someone sent an email saying, we're on vacation. I forgot my low protein food list. I'm going to post my kids' meals here every day. And can someone look them up? Tell me how much fee is it? And then I'll add it up for the rest of the day. And I'd gotten this, and I should have brought it, but it's like this, a small town phone book. It's, I don't know, an inch thick or something. And I was sitting there with this baby who, I had to weigh before and after nursing and give her this formula and do all this stuff, and looking at this book thinking, there is no way I am carrying this around for the next 18 years. It's just not happening. And so, because I'm also not good at sort of being idle, as much as you're never idle with a newborn and another kid, I thought, well, let's see if we can work up a basic web application where one could look up this data on your phone, on the computer, whatever. So I used some USDA data and sort of worked up a concept. And when I had that in February, when my daughter was like 5 months old, I emailed the organization that had published this low protein food list. And this organization is 32 years old, had published a newsletter for PKU for all that time, which was 3 times a year, had information on research and articles, stories about, adults with PKU and kids and recipes you could make, and just sort of was pre-internet was the way that the community worked together. And I said, I've got this 5-month-old with PKU. I've got this coping mechanism that I've created as a way to gain control over this in this web app. Can we talk about, how to make this happen with the data for PKU? And the board of directors said, yes, let's figure it out. And we got a grant and we developed this app called How Much Fee, which has now about 9,000 foods in it. It's a web app, but it's used on your phone, your computer, wherever, whatever platform. And you can look up the phenylalanine data for any food, put in the weight of it, calculate, how much they've eaten, record it in a log. You can export that to your dietitian, etc. And so we launched that when my daughter was 11 months old. So it was really the first year of her life was dealing with that, and then building this app. And then about a year after that, the director of the organization, who'd been doing it basically solo for 28 years, decided she wanted to retire. And so I was already spending all my free time doing this. And the board asked me if I wanted to come on as director of the organization. So that's where I am now. We have a lot of other programs besides How Much Fee, but that is sort of our main program that I spend most of my time on.
Is that something that our audience can look up? Is it howmuchfee.com?
It's .org. I mean, .com.
.org. Okay.
It's .org.
Okay.
It is a subscription-based program. So it's $45 a year for families. We provide scholarships for those who need it. A lot of clinics provide it, or local organizations provide it for their patients, because it helps the dietitians as well, with just, asking someone, well, what did you eat for the last week? It's pretty hard to get them to recall, or what did your kid eat, and what, so this helps also clinicians really treat their patients. You can record your blood levels and track them in it as well.
Amazing. That is really impressive. To have a newborn, a second child that has PKU, and to create an application is amazing. And
I think it really was a coping mechanism.
It's a way of you, trying to garner some control over something that felt completely out of control, right?
Definitely.
And it ends up helping so many people. So what I really want to talk about, especially since we have a lot of folks listening today that work with clients in some capacity around nutrition. So I really want to talk about the realities of the diet. What does that look like? How do you manage it? I know you guys, you've got this wonderful application, but again, I've seen kind of behind the scenes, the weighing, the measuring, the counting, the logging, with my sister, they make it look so easy. But I know, and the other thing that I do want to delve into is, how do normal people manage this? That's probably a topic. Let's talk about the nutrition first, what that looks like, what the diet looks like, the composition of the diet, and then we can talk maybe a little bit about management. Kara, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously with PKU, humans still need protein to survive. And so our kids derive their protein primarily from what we call a formula or a drink, where they have medically eliminated the phenylalanine from it. So it's essentially like a protein shake without phenylalanine in it. And every kid has a different recipe. My kids each have a separate preparation that we make each day that they drink 4 or 5 times a day, and it has all the essential aminos and protein and nutrients in them. And then everything after that is, all low-fee foods that are either fruits and vegetables or foods that you can purchase from, low PKU, low protein organizations. So, we have like an entire huge, closet filled with pastas and breads and pizza crusts and, you name it, that we procure especially for them. But everything is weighed and measured. We have what's called a magic number of how much fee they can have each day, and we look up on how much fee every day, what they're eating, and we just log it. So we literally have journals since both the kids are born with every single thing they've ever eaten in those journals. So imagine as a parent, which I don't know any other difference, logging every single thing your child has eaten and having weighed it and calculated the fee per gram. And so most PKU parents are like crazy savants with the fee per gram and like every food that our kids eat, memorizing it from how much fee. So that's what the experience looks like. So you want to keep that level to their number, and then they get tested, blood tested usually about once a month, unless they have a variation that needs to be tested more sooner than that. And, you adjust from there in cooperation with your dietitian. So, they do eat a fair amount of fruit and vegetables. It's really no easier to get them to eat it than a normal toddler or a normal kid. But we try to celebrate those foods. We really try to keep, that was the biggest change as a parent, is taking the emotion out of food for the most part. We have a pretty low drama, black and white approach with our kids. Like, this is either good for your body or it's not. And there's always an amazing alternative for you that will work for your diet. And so our kids, Kaylin, I would say more than Briar, more than my little guy, is really no nonsense about it. She never gets pretty riled up. Briar, on the other hand, has had some rogue missions. Just the other day, he lapped up a whole mouthful of Chipotle mayo, and he was very, very upset once he realized what it tasted like. But
it wasn't worth it.
No, he was like everywhere, but so he seems a little bit more courageous and kind of wants to try things anyway. Whereas Kaylin could not care less. She just knows that she has her low fee thing. So so our kids are pretty
interesting. Is they have to have some phenylalanine.
Yes, a little bit.
Right?
Everybody metabolizes.
It is an essential amino, right? So
yeah.
So you do need some. So it's not a no-fee diet. It's a low phenylalanine diet.
Yeah.
And so what I'm hearing you say, Kara, is, and Sarah, you mentioned this too, that each child is kind of given their, is unique. So the diet is very personalized based on their ability, their tolerance, right? Mm-hmm. Their ability to, some can metabolize a little bit of fee, right? So that varies. And so the other thing so I want to hear about what the diet really looks like how does that translate? But it really makes me curious, oh my gosh, to get a child's blood drawn, a little child's blood drawn. Yeah. I remember when my daughter Juliet, one time in her whole life, and she still is traumatized by getting a finger prick one time in her whole life. And oh my gosh, it was the biggest ordeal. I don't know how.
Talk about no nonsense. I mean, I think now that is not a big deal to my kid, at least. Although the funny story is we were watching Elf at Christmas and he has to get a DNA test. Buddy the elf, the adult, has to get a DNA test, and they prick his finger and he's like, ah!
Yeah.
And my 7-year-old sitting on the floor and she raises her fist and she says, I feel you, man. She knows what it feels like. But then something will happen and she'll skin her knee and she'll be like, get a blood spot. Because we got to take advantage of those opportunities.
Oh God, I'm bleeding. Just collect the blood. Oh my gosh.
Because we do finger pricks, and we do, it's still called the Guthrie card. Basically, it's just we only have to do one little circle on a card, fill it in with blood and send it into the clinic. And, we're lucky that we get our results back probably within 3 or 4 days, depending on where we send it in. Talk about the struggles of managing diets. Some places in the country, it can be 2 weeks before you get results. And if you find out your kid's blood level was high 2 weeks ago, or your blood level, because I don't want to forget that this is not just a kid's disorder. It's a lifelong disorder, and in a lot of cases, the adults are struggling more than the kids because they don't have us obsessing over and doing their math for them. But so it can take 2 weeks to get your blood test back, and then you find out my level was high then. Well, I can't adjust my diet from 2 weeks ago. Where am I now? So there's a lot of there's still a long way to go. I mean, we can detect PKU and we can treat it. There are cost barriers to these foods that we all have in our cupboards. I mean, each state has different reimbursement laws or insurance coverage laws for these medical foods, but on average, a loaf of bread is $10, and it's a small loaf of bread.
Oh my God.
Pasta can be $9 a pound instead of $1 or $2 a pound. So those are really rich cupboards that we have in our houses.
Yeah.
And I do a lot of also, I think Kara does too, a lot of low protein baking because you can make those things yourself. It's you need a chemistry degree or someone like my board member who created a website called Cook for Love, which is under the PK News umbrella, and she was a speech language pathologist. When her daughter, who's now a sophomore in college, was diagnosed, she quit and went to culinary school and went to the vegan and vegetarian program in New York, which involves a lot of beans and legumes, of course, which are not good for PKU, but it, also doesn't involve eggs and, steak and all those other things, and really created some amazing recipes, which our whole family will eat. But again, it's time intensive and it's labor intensive to make those things. So definitely that's an added on sort of time cost for the families.
So, all right. So what does this PKU diet look like? Because as I said, many of the people watching deal with, recommending certain macronutrients in some capacity, right? So if it's a low protein diet, what are we looking at in terms of, carbohydrate and fat?
Lots of it.
Lots of it. Yeah. It's because they got to have enough energy and calories. And yeah. So the sugar in the diet, tell me about that.
I mean, I know I have a kid who does not like fruits and vegetables and we work constantly, but she is not where she needs to be with it, particularly because as she grows older, it's one thing, your ability to metabolize feed doesn't really increase as you grow, because as you grow, your body needs less of that amino acid. And so someone, she gets 5 or 6 grams now, and she'll probably get that when she's older.
5 or 6 grams per day. Yeah.
So that's 2 slices of Wonder Bread for, if you want to look, or, a small bowl of Cheerios, so, and that probably won't change as she grows. So, we do a lot of baked goods, which again have the carbohydrates and the sugar. We do, she does do applesauce. That's sort of what we call a free food. It has very low fee. So if she wants, she can have as much of it. But it's true that when I send her off to a play date, I often pack something for her, but I say, you run out of that, sugar is fine, because if she's hungry and she needs something, that's what other people have in their houses, which is safe to give her. So I will say my older daughter has benefited in that we have a lot more sugary things in the house. Germs never would have crossed, into the kitchen before, but now they're a possibility, and the older kid benefits from that.
Right. So is it true then that because you touched on the idea that we don't, the diet is still a mainstay regardless of age. And that's actually kind of a newer philosophy, kind of going back to the days when I learned about PKU. It was a long time ago, but I do vaguely remember them saying in school, it's only for X number of years. And then, you can pretty much do whatever you want in terms of consumption of protein. So basically that's not true. Right. And yeah, let's talk about that as kids get older. You know, what changes, if anything? How do you deal with that? Like, kids want to eat pizza when they're teenagers, right? How do you deal with that? And tell me about the formula. Do they, because that is like a really, really, it's a main component
Yep.
of their calories, right? So do they have to stay on that pretty much like for how long?
Yeah, I mean, they're probably on the same formula or more for the rest of their lives. I mean, I think you've touched on a few issues. I mean, the issue with the medical history, it wasn't until late 80s, early 90s when really they said, okay, it's diet for life. And that took even longer to sort of trickle down because, again, not many people see, you know, PKU patients. They estimate that there's about 17,500 or 18,000 people who were diagnosed with PKU since the onset of newborn screening in the US. Only about 8,000 to 9,000 of those are currently under care. So basically half of the population has been lost to follow-up. And the reasons for that are A, they turned 12 or 18 and were told, you're good. We were careful, we protected your brain. They moved out of their parents' house. They didn't take their pediatric records with them. They now may have a lot of neurological issues. They may have, anxiety. They may have tremors. They may have, depression, ability, problem concentrating, executive functioning issues, which they have no idea are tied to their PKU. Wow. Because if they have gone off diet, because as they were told, they have no reason to suspect. So that is a huge problem. Even for those people who went off diet and want to get back on, insurance, a lot of states pay for formula for kids because, again, it's such a children's disease, a newborn screening disease. Payment or insurance coverage for those medical foods we were talking about is terrible. I don't have any medical foods coverage. And my husband works for one of the biggest universities in the country, but because of the way the plan is structured, legally, we don't have coverage. So that's a huge barrier to getting back on diet, as is just the ability to do all that calculation and planning and weighing and measuring, because when you're experiencing these neurological symptoms, those are the first things you cannot do. That concentration, that calculation, all of that, is the first to go. And so that is a big problem for adults, who are diagnosed earlier but may have gone out of care. And then it's just, the question of being full. I just fed my daughter 17 grams of dry pasta for lunch, and she was full. I cooked it first, to be clear, but but that was her lunch, and she was perfectly happy with it. It was low-fat pasta, and she was good. But that's not going to satisfy an adult. So an adult portion of that would have a tremendous amount of carbohydrates. And if, particularly the medical foods are very high in carbohydrates and fats. And so as we look at the population aging, we're only now knowing what people who have been on diet for 50, 60 years look like. And what their issues are: diabetes, blood pressure, all those things that are follow-ons from the diet. The diet is a lifesaver, but we don't even yet know all the things that it can cause because we haven't had those patients to study. So that's, it's a really interesting problem, but it's certainly a problem for a large population.
Right. So they started testing, 50 years ago?
Yeah, it was in the sort of mid to late 60s when it was mandated in all 50 states. Some states started earlier, some states later.
Okay. So it's remarkable. So basically they ideally would stay on formula indefinitely. Mm-hmm. In some places formula is covered, but maybe not for adults. Right? And it's it's got to be very expensive. I can't imagine, can you give me a monetary, just a sense of what this would cost?
It's like a few $100s. I know that one case of, regular cans of formula, imagine the, old school cans of formula. I think a 6-pack case of those runs around $350, $380 if it's not covered by insurance. our insurance covers the majority of it, but not all of it. And we don't have any food coverage. So all of that food is out of pocket.
And will they continue to cover it as Kaylin, as the kids get older, Kaylin and Briar get older?
Yeah, as long as they're on our insurance. But we
Okay.
often talk about having a savings account just in the event that they need, the resources to pay for their own insurance,
Right.
their own food, their own formula.
Right.
Really, really important down the line, especially as, healthcare changes. So.
Right. Okay. So I guess this is a good segue into, how we can help, right? Because, I mean, let's face it, so many people, I seriously don't know how they do it. And it is really heartbreaking to think. I mean, number one, they don't have the executive functioning skills to be able to manage it, which is absolutely heartbreaking in of itself, right? Because they just don't have those skills, the organizational skills and the ability to manage this really small window of blood levels for their child, which is devastating in of itself. And then, you add in the cost, it's a big double whammy, right? So can you both speak to what can we do to support the PKU community?
Sarah, I can let you take that.
Okay. I mean, I will talk. I mean, I've talked a little bit about how much fee and how we provide scholarships, to that, because I think that is an important tool. It's not, it's not going to cure anything, but it's a good support system. And so that's always, helpful. Just donations can go to that. Another thing that, we touched on a little with the insurance question. I mean, with COVID hitting and so many people losing their jobs, a lot of people lost their medical insurance along with that, and with that, their medical nutrition coverage. Whether it was good or bad, as long as they had some, it was a big help. So we, PK News ended up spending basically April through September running a grants program where we got foundation grants and also private support, and we ended up giving away $88,000 in grants in the form of basically $200 per family to tide them over, pay for some medical foods. It's only a couple months of medical foods, and also sort of give them a free year or extend their How Much Fee subscription. So we, that was a huge need. I mean, I opened it up and I distributed half the money within 3 weeks. And then we went out and raised more money. I mean, I think that's just donating, whether it's to PKU News or another organization that works on PKU, there are a lot of local organizations as well, is really helpful. Another piece that doesn't cost any money either is there's a bill that will be reintroduced in Congress called the Medical Nutrition Equity Act, which we're very involved in. It was in the last Congress and had a lot of support, but didn't pass. And that will set, I mentioned that each state has different laws for coverage, and a lot of people find they can't take a promotion because they'll lose their state-based coverage, and it's better than the private coverage, or they can't move to another state where, the love of their life has been found because they won't have coverage for formula. And the idea that people are sort of stuck because of this, is really heartbreaking. So the Medical Nutrition Equity Act will set a federal floor that says basically, this is a medical treatment. It's been the accepted medical treatment for years, for decades. It needs to be reimbursed like a drug. So it will say 80% or better of medical foods and formula will be reimbursed by private, public, federal, even those plans like mine that are exempted from state law. It's a national law that will require that. So just going and asking your representatives and your senators, your representative and your senators to support that is really important. There's a website called nutritionequity.org, which is a coalition of a bunch of metabolic disorders and a bunch of GI disorders, people who have Crohn's and colitis, who need medical foods to suppress flares. are also on that bill. It's a huge population. PKU is the largest community in it because we're on it lifelong. And it's our primary treatment.
Interesting. I'm going to type that in if I can spell here. Nutrition equity.
Yeah, I always misspell it. And it's Cook for Love. It says Cool for Love.
Okay.
It's probably a very different website.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
I did. I wanted to just because I'm really curious about this. So let me just say, if I put a bit.ly link on the screen. I had a birthday this week, another one crept up on me. And so I am doing a Facebook fundraiser. You know how you can do those fundraisers. So I really wanted to dedicate my fundraiser this year again for PKU. So if anyone is feeling inspired and just, any little bit helps, all you have to do is type in the link exactly how you see it. So it is case sensitive. So it's bit.ly/diet for PKU. And the diet is capitalized and PKU is capitalized. So again, any little bit helps. I did want to I'm curious about COVID. You mentioned COVID and we didn't even touch on that. Where are children, people with PKU, are they finding they're at higher risk? Can you speak to that a little bit, Sarah?
Yeah, so luckily the answer is no.
Okay.
One thing that happens when people with PKU get sick is that their blood levels tend to escalate. So some clinics will have you eat less feed that day. And that's something you'd certainly see. So it has if someone with PKU gets COVID, it's the same as if they're getting a flu. They probably need to adjust their diet. The initial CDC alert did say people with metabolic disorders were at higher risks, but that does not luckily include PKU because it's talking about disorders like maple syrup urine disease or other diseases where you can, decompensate and go into a coma and die if your blood levels are escalated. Mm-hmm. Luckily, PKU does not have that sort of, that sharp risk. And so, another question which we've seen a lot is, well, this mRNA vaccine, now that a lot of people with PKU have had COVID and come through it, and, it's not pleasant for anyone. And there's been worse cases and milder cases. But now that the vaccine is up, people say, well, the mRNA instructs your body to create these proteins. And people with PKU are so programmed to think protein in my bloodstream is bad, which it is, that they hear that and get concerned. So, we did a lot of messaging around that because it is safe. It is not creating a protein that your body will digest in the same way. It is not going to raise your Phe levels. That spike protein that we hear so much about is not an increased risk for people with PKU. So we got lucky there. I have yet to hear whether a lot of states are basing their vaccine grouping on that CDC language. So it may be possible that people with PKU can say, hey, I've got an inborn error of metabolism. I'm in 1C or whatever. I don't know, but I was talking to an adult with PKU yesterday and she said, well, I think technically I could, but I don't need it as much as a lot of other people.
Okay.
So it's the same calculus we're all going through.
Okay. Super interesting. All right. Well, you could get...
Is that a question?
Yeah. Piper has a question. My two dogs are, it's funny what happens during a Facebook Live, right? We're live. So phone rings, the dogs go berserk, they're wrestling on the ground. All right. Is there anything, Kara, is there anything you'd like to add before we wrap up?
I wanted to circle back on, the ask and the resources that support PKU. The work that Sarah does and several other executive directors of PKU-related nonprofits, they really make an absolute profound, and I want to underline in bold the word profound, difference in the lives of both parents and kids and adults living with PKU. I really can't even imagine at this point, like thinking back to the day where I did have to look up fee values in like a great big book every day. I can't imagine not having Cook for Love to look up recipes. Now we have another app that shows us like restaurants in town that have low pro options. We have a different nonprofit called PKU Northwest that has hosted everything from camps to gatherings. I mean, my daughter at one point literally thought PKU was just a party. I'm not kidding, because we would go to so many great events where she got together with kids and had great food that she's like, oh yay, another PKU thing. And this has allowed us to bring normalcy and joy and health to our lives. And so supporting these organizations and all the work they're doing is what kind of makes the whole thing tick. And, again, we're lucky to be in Seattle, where I have a really sound network of folks. But in other parts of even Washington and the country, it's just not quite the same. So, giving to these organizations goes directly to families that really, really need it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and it sounds like, I mean, without the application, I cannot even imagine. It doesn't even, it's like completely mind-boggling how you would even begin to manage this.
Well, also the money that it takes, I mean, Sarah didn't speak to this, but to get all of those foods tested, like all of us out in the world will be like, hey, Sarah, can you get this food tested for phenylalanine levels and put it up on the site? So, I've sent a couple things her way that she'll, that'll get in line to get tested. And that also is an incredible expense to the organization.
Yeah. And we have a dietitian on staff who's basically, her job is, because, food labels in the US are rounded. And so it can be 0.3 grams of protein and say less than 1 gram or 0. It could say 0.5, but it could really have 0.8. And, this is getting into the weeds, but, there can be from 25 to 65 milligrams of phenylalanine in 1 gram of protein, depending on whether it's an apple or oats. And so if you look at a label that says, 0 grams of protein, it could have 0.45 grams of protein, and really up to 30 milligrams of phe, which is 10% of my daughter's intake for the day. Or, a label that says 2 grams could have something almost, 2/3 of her day, and we wouldn't know it. And so we do a lot of research to contact the companies and say, hey, is it 0.6 or 0.9? And then look at the phenylalanine to protein ratios for each ingredient, and develop, an estimate. And then we also do, for things like jackfruit has become very popular as a meat substitute. We don't really know how much phenylalanine is in jackfruit, so we send that off to our lab to do both protein and phenylalanine. So then we have a basis. We did oat milk because oat milk has become wildly popular. So we said, well, let's do a baseline test, because the USDA database is not, I'm still using numbers from 1984 for some things. So yeah, we have this testing program, and we have this community input program where people say, these are the foods I'm eating. I want to be able to eat them or feed them to my kid. Help me out. And so that's one thing, just helping support our amino acid program is really helpful as well.
Wow. It's so detailed. I really commend the amazing work that you've done. Both of you. It was so fun to have you today.
Thanks. Really,
thank you for doing this.
Yeah. So really for a great cause. So, all right, guys. So I guess it's time to say goodbye for now. Until next time. And just a big thank you to my sister Kara and Sarah for joining me today and really sharing some incredible information about PKU and the realities of living with PKU. So, all right, everybody, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye for now.
Thank you.